Good evening and welcome to this League of Women Voters Forum for the candidates in the November election for House District 43A. My name is Liz Nordling and I will be moderating the forum tonight. As a trusted volunteer nonpartisan organization, the League of Women Voters does not support or oppose political parties or candidates. We sponsor forums to provide voters an opportunity to hear candidates' views about issues of interest in the upcoming election. For more information about the Minnesota League, please visit our website at lwvmn.org. The order for speaking tonight will begin in alphabetical order and will be rotated thereafter. Candidates' remarks are being timed to assure equality of time, and questions are being collected from the audience. Our candidates are Peter Fischer and Stacy Stout. We will now hear opening remarks from our two candidates, and we will begin with Peter Fischer.
Good evening, and thank you, first of all, to the League of Women Voters for hosting the event tonight. It's an honor to be here, and it's also been an honor to be a representative for the last 2 years. 2 years ago when I ran, the state was very dysfunctional. We had a lot of crises that had happened. We had a state shut down. We borrowed heavily from our schools. One of the things that was very important at the time is I worked at a homeless youth shelter in North Minneapolis as Director of Finance and Operations. And I observed as how parties were not getting along and people were not interacting in a proper way to help find the solutions to make our state a better place. So that motivated me to run 2 years ago. And it's one of the things that I think I've done very well, is I've worked very hard across party lines to help move solutions forward for our state. Our state is better off today than it was 2 years ago. Our schools are paid back. We have a budget that is sustainable and not running chronic deficits as we had over the last 10 years. I've been also recognized by the League of Cities for working in a very collaborative, bipartisan way to address the serious water issues that have been facing our community in the area of White Bear Lake. I've been proud to be able to do this kind of work, and also it is something that I'm very proud to continue a tradition that has started in my family over the decades with my mother, who has served in the local community in a very collaborative way for many decades, something that I've been able to continue to do. I'm very proud of the fact that my son has also entered in the public service in the past years, now serving in the White Bear Lake Fire Department. It's something that over the generations my family's been committed to, and representing the community in a very fair, balanced way. It's something that I feel I've accomplished over the last 2 years and I'd like to continue to do. I'd like to make sure that we continue providing good work for our schools. We've done a lot to help stabilize our schools. We've provided all-day kindergarten. And we've restored cuts that had originally been planned for nursing homes. But there is a lot more opportunities, and that's why we're here this evening to talk about the issues.
Thank you. Now with her opening statement, Stacy Stout.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this. I'm Stacy Stout. My husband and I have 2 sons, Jackson and Ethan, who attend Mahtomedi Elementary School. They're at home right now, and he's putting them to bed, so they're not with us. They are 4th generation Minnesotans, and we love raising them in this community. We attend St. Andrew's Lutheran Church, and I'm on the board of the White Bear Area YMCA. So this community means a lot to us. As an attorney, I served as a legislative counsel for over 14 years on a number of important issues: cybersecurity, data security, identity theft, fraud, public safety issues. And I know that it's important that we find solutions-oriented approaches to solving the needs in our communities. I believe in service, hard work, discipline, and personal responsibility. My parents worked hard to run a small business. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, and I believe in public service. That's why after law school, I chose to go into public service. And as a Rotary Scholar, I grew as a leader in service to others. As a mom, I am committed to always improving and ensuring high standards in education for all our kids. Having parents who are seniors, who are on a fixed income, rely on Medicare and Social Security, I'm committed to making sure our elderly's needs are met in our community. Having worked at the United States Department of Justice and having a husband who works for a sheriff, I believe we should be keeping our community safe and making sure law enforcement have all the tools they need in order to do so. My ability to problem solve, respect differing opinions, work with others, have effective collaborative strategies, those are the strengths I'll take to the Capitol. I will be a principled, pragmatic, independent voice for us in St. Paul, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you. We will begin our questioning. First question will go to you, Tracy, or Stacy. Would you identify MNsure, the health insurance exchange, as a success or a failure, and why?
Well, I think on a number of counts, it has failed us. I think we all agree we want affordable, accessible, very quality care. And Minnesota had one of the lowest rates of uninsured before we brought in Obamacare to our state. And now we've spent millions upon millions, I think it's 160 million, in implementing this in our state, and we've had a number of problems. I think we've seen, I think it's great that we have some people who are now insured, but the problem is we've got a lot of families who are facing higher rates. We were told that families would be receiving $500 back, and now all we read in the papers are the percentages that each plan might go up, or that will go up. So I think it's failed us in the sense that we had an excellent system here in Minnesota. We had excellent quality care. And I think we need to make sure we do all we can to get those standards back that we had. We need a board. Right now we have a MNsure board. I think that's also been a failure in the sense that there's no accountability. They're not elected. They were given bonuses. And we need to ensure that there's accountability for the decisions they're making.
Thank you. The question now goes to Peter Fischer.
I think the problems that we've had with MNsure has been a problem with being able to roll out a system. It was not given enough time to be able to roll out properly. It was trying to address the problems of a system that was recognized as being broken beforehand. Working in the small business area, particularly in a nonprofit, one of the problems that I've recognized over the years is that for us to try to get affordable insurance for our staff has been extremely challenging. One of the things that I know that when I was in the private sector is that the health insurance premium cost for myself and my family was 2.5 times the rate of my mortgage. I've run into many people, half our bankruptcies occurred because of the fact that in the previous system, healthcare contributed to 50% of all mortgages. I can tell you right now with MNsure that it is working, and that the current system that we had before does not work well. As we have struggled as a nonprofit in trying to provide coverage for our staff, we found out that many of our staff is able to get premiums and insurance much cheaper on MNsure than we're able to get in the private sector for a small business. It makes it very difficult from a small business to provide good coverage for their employees and make sure that they can have something to live on and know that they're going to have their medical bills covered. So I think there are a lot of things that MNsure has got some capabilities on. It could be better. It would have been great. It would have been much more successful. It would have had the lead time to be able to put the technology in place to make it successful.
Thank you. Stacy, do you have any additional comments you want to make on that?
Well, I just want to point out that we did have a quality system in place, and it was providing for many uninsured. So if there wasn't enough time, I think a better option would have been to sort out all of those problems before we did away with the great system we had.
Thank you, Peter. Any additional comments?
Yes, the Republicans were given a chance in the legislature before we came into power to start rolling MNsure out to make sure that we have those problems addressed. They chose to take a gamble and think that it would be ruled unconstitutional and not happen. And as a result, the time length needed for IT people to do their job was wasted on a gamble. And now we're all suffering for it.
The next question will go to you first, Peter. What is the most pressing environmental issue in this district, and how will you address it?
I would say that the most pressing environmental issue we have is the sustainable use of water in the area, both on quality and quantity. And we see that on a daily basis with what is happening with the White Bear Lake. White Bear Lake has been drawn down because it is tied directly to the aquifer that provides drinking water for the entire area. So it's acting as a gauge. So as we see White Bear Lake go down, the water quality is going down and the water in the aquifer is going down. And what we find out, if we don't do anything different, by the Met Council own reports between 2030 and 2040, that the wells in Woodbury will have problems having enough water to pump out. We know that we need to do something differently. And this is one of the issues where I've been focusing most of my efforts on. It's one of the issues that the League of Cities has recognized me for my efforts on, in leading a bipartisan group of legislators in a collaborative way, looking for the solutions to help move forward, and also working very hard to make sure that we're avoiding unintended consequences.
Thank you. Stacy?
Well, I agree that I think sustainable use of water is probably the most pressing issue here in our community. And as Representative Fischer said, because of White Bear Lake, it's such an important part of our community. And I applaud everyone who's been working on this issue to find the causes and solutions. And we're looking for measures to ensure a sustainable supply. I think broad-based collaboration is the key. And we really need to make sure all the options are on the table and we're studying what needs to be done to address that issue. Our resources, it's such a precious resource here in our community, and so I think that we should make sure we are studying all the options, such as a study for augmentation. I know Senator Leager got funding for that in the Senate bill, and I would have liked to have seen us get that in addition to the many other options that we've had funded. So that way we can see maybe we need a couple of approaches to address this. And so I think we just need all the knowledge we can, because I know that 50 years from now, I want people to look back and say they did the right thing.
Thank you. Our next question goes to you first, Stacy. How should we proceed with the issue of sulfide mining in northern Minnesota?
Well, that's an important issue, as we all know that our precious minerals are valuable to our state. I think we need to have a balanced approach, making sure that we are protecting our environment and all measures are in place that our environment is being protected, so that we can make use of those in the most responsible manner.
Thank you. Peter?
Some of the things that we have to keep in mind with the sulfide mining is that right now there's not been a proven facility throughout the world that has not had contamination issues with sulfide mining. We had not long ago the problem up in Canada, where one of the dams holding things back, the earthen dam, let loose and contaminated a complete wilderness area. One of the problems that I see with the area is that while we need the precious metals very importantly, sometimes in the rush to get things done, we overlook the problems that are reality out there. And that happened as experience for us back in the 70s, when reserve mining was brought to court because of the asbestos contamination that they did in the Great Lakes. They contaminated Superior Lake with the asbestos as it was released from their facility, and the federal government had to step in to do the corrections of the problems, which we all as taxpayers ended up paying for. And that's why I'm hesitant and very cautious about how we proceed forward on it, because it is something that initially the companies who are coming in to make the money provide the jobs will only be around for 20 or 30 years, and it's a shell company that will have no liability left after they're gone. In the meantime, if something goes wrong, not only does it affect the environment, it affects the economy up there. Many of the jobs in the economy up there are tied to tourism, and many of those jobs would disappear if there was a major leak that damaged the tourism and the boundary waters up there. So it's something that we have to keep in mind. I do not see the technology being at a point where it is safe enough, and it's not been proven to have financial assurances that will last to be able to provide for any solutions for problems that may occur in the future.
Thank you. Stacy, do you have any additional comments? Our next question goes to Peter first. A group of students from Concordia University wants to eliminate a provision that grants lawmakers immunity from arrest for misdemeanors while in session. It's also known as the get out of jail free card. Do you support this effort? Why or why not?
I think it's fine that we do away with it, because in effect it really doesn't have any impact now. I don't even have a car myself. I think what it does is it gives an onus out there that's really not, that's not valid.
Stacy?
Yes, I think the get out of jail free card was originally implemented so that when lawmakers were rushing back to the Capitol, their constituents' rights would be protected in a sense that their representative would get to the vote in time, and no one could thwart that or throw a vote by keeping them distracted somehow. I don't think we really have a need for it anymore. It seems to make sense that we could do away with that card. I don't think anyone's used it. I think we would have heard the stories if they had. I applaud the Concordia students. I think it's great that they took initiative. They did get a little bit of a pushback when they went to the Capitol, and they really, I think, it was a real lesson in grassroots politics, so I applaud them for that.
Thank you. Our next question goes to you first, Stacey Stout. The legislature failed in its duty to redistrict, and the job fell to judges. What do you see as the fairest way to accomplish this once every 10 years task?
Well, yes, that's why we are here tonight, because we were redistricted, and we've now found ourselves in the district we have because the judges drew the lines this way. I think it's unfortunate. I know that the plan is that it will go through the legislature and that will be designed that way, but there seems to always be a problem in getting agreement. So perhaps there's other options out there to be looking at. So either a bipartisan or a non-partisan group, just completely independent, could design it, or perhaps we could let computers take a try at it. I don't know. I don't know how we get away from it always ending up in the hands of judges, but maybe we should try thinking outside the box.
Thank you. Peter Fischer.
Thank you. I firmly believe that one of the problems we've had over the years is we've had redistricting in the hands of legislators. You're always going to have one party or the other trying to make sure they've got their own interests best represented as they go forward. And so you get a lot of gerrymandering that's occurred. What I've always liked as an approach is, number one, is if you gave the courts a very fair approach, because we've had a great respected court system here in our state that's done some great work in bipartisan, nonpartisan ways. I think giving the courts the time and the opportunities, or I'm also open to other groups. I was putting up a good nonpartisan group together and looking more at what are the more important issues. Respecting demographic lines, respecting areas of communities of similar interests, trying to respect political borders. I mean, living in the city of Maplewood, I've seen times where Maplewood, a population of right now 39,000, has been as many as 5 different house districts. Sometimes these things just don't make sense. And I think what we need to do is be able to set that out and have people take a look at it and take it up out of our hands and put it in the hands of people who can take a look at it more from an objective view, and then we go with that.
Thank you. Our next question goes to you first, Peter. As a working parent, what impact will home daycare unionization have on my family budget?
I'm trying to understand. So as the person who's asking
this, this question, as a working parent, they want to know what impact will home daycare unionization have on their family budget.
The unionization of child care workers in child care is basically from a state side for those that are receiving state subsidies. And what it is doing is making sure that those who elect to be in it and negotiate is to negotiate what those rates are going to be with the state of Minnesota. So for your average person, the unionization has nothing to do with their going on rates, what their going rates are going to be. For the state of Minnesota, that presents an issue where they have another unit to bargain with to see what is going to happen.
Thank you. Stacy?
Thank you. Well, as a working mom of 2 little boys who are 5 and 6, I understand this issue firsthand. Up until this year, my boys have been in full-time daycare, and so I know the cost, and it is very expensive to have your children in daycare. So I believe that unionizing the daycare, when you're requiring then these caretakers to then pay union dues, there will be a cost that probably gets passed along. You know, I think it's also concerning in the sense that these are usually women-owned businesses, and they've found a perfect solution to help meet the needs of their family as well as needs in the community. And so it's really concerning that here they are, private employers, private business owners, not employers. Usually they're running it themselves, and instead of encouraging that opportunity, we are dissuading them if they take any state money, because then they have to become part of a union. And it's essentially going into a private home who I don't really see the connection where they should be considered state employees. So it's really concerning, one, for the person who's running the business, usually women, and here's their opportunity to succeed, and we should be encouraging that. And plus the families who are using that service then have this added cost in the child care fees.
Thank you. Any additional comments, Peter?
Yes, I would challenge some of the things that were being put out there is that, first of all, from the aspect is that this is something that would just apply to state issues, people that are working, being paid for with vouchers from the state, where they're going to be able to negotiate and have someone representing them in a way to present their wages. And this is not unusual. As in the past, the unions, most of the unions that came out of skilled trades that originally were doing their own work, and they banded together to make sure they were paid a living wage. And that's how the union movement started, is out of similar situations back in the skilled areas.
Any additional comments, Stacy?
Yes, I understand that it only applies to those who are taking state money, but the concern is that this was not something they went to seek. They have been put in a position where they have to do this if they want to keep those children. Otherwise, they turn them away, and then I hope that doesn't eliminate places for these children to go who do rely on that state assistance.
Thank you. The next question goes to you first, Stacy. What will you do to advance women's economic security?
Well, again, as a woman in the workplace, I understand this issue firsthand. It's part of why I'm running, actually. There's only 1/3 of our legislature are women, and even fewer have kids who are still at home. So I do believe I relate to this issue very well, and I think we all want a level playing field. I know in my career it's been very important to make sure that there are laws in place to ensure that we have the chance to move up and have all the options on the table as anyone else would. And I believe it's important that we continue to see these opportunities in place. We continue to see legislation that it opens doors that were closed otherwise, and that the laws are enforced.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that Stacey's a strong supporter of making sure we have women's economic security, because in the last legislative session, we moved a number of things forward to help address this issue. We were vigorously opposed by people from the Minnesota Jobs Coalition and from the Chamber of Commerce, the State Chamber of Commerce. And a number of areas that they're hitting on is some of the important things that we've been pushing forward is comparable pay for women. That is one of the things that was opposed. And some of the things I heard in committee was, we don't, right now women may be paid 80% of men. That's the way it is because we can't afford it anymore. We should not try to do anything differently. I find that somewhat offensive. I feel that I have 2 daughters out there who are entering the workplace. And right now, the way the workplace is set up, they'll earn on average 80% of what a man does. I don't think that's fair for comparable work. I think it's something that if we don't challenge and push people forward, those kind of things continue in the past, will continue in the future. It used to be, it was okay in the past, when I was first starting the business, that it was okay for sexual harassment to occur. And businesses used to find out ways to get around it. This is the beginning of where women's economic security occurred, and businesses fought those very early on. As a matter of fact, I worked at a business when I was 21 and was fired because I brought up the fact that the waitresses were being sexually harassed by the manager. And management's response, the board's response, was that the manager has the right to do whatever he wants. And that is where I started very early on in the track, working to help defend women's rights going forward, and not only economic rights, but the right to be able to choose their health care.
Thank you. Additional comments, Stacy? Our next question goes to you first, Peter. In campaigns, the opposition often tries to paint a negative picture of a candidate. What would you like to clarify or correct about the portrayal of you?
Oh, wow. I'm really not great. I've got color in my face. I think the best thing is that one of the things to understand is most of the laws and some of the biggest things that I've seen that's been printed out there were votes that were actually bipartisan votes, which is very, very interesting. I know that one of the areas that was hit on is in the education area, not allowing laws that would make our children at risk, which I would never do. But it was a bill. The bill that was cited was one that had strong support of Senator Han and Tony Cornish, who were on the conference committee that passed it. So I found it very ironic that the Republican Party was condemning me for something that had strong bipartisan support. I do know that very clearly that I've been endorsed by the Minnesota police officers and peace officers, and by the Minnesota firefighters. Because I've worked real hard to protect our communities. I work at a homeless youth shelter, and that's one of the #1 things that we work very hard on, is making sure that we're providing ways to make sure that our youth are safe and making sure that we're keeping an eye out so that if they're ever preyed upon, taken advantage of, that we report those things immediately and make sure that action is taken to make sure that those kids stay safe in the future.
Thank you. Stacy?
Yes. Well, I think it's important to first clarify that, so everyone understands, these independent expenditures are just that. They are coming from outside parties, and I want to applaud Representative Fischer for continuing to run a positive race. I'm running a positive race. By law, we cannot even ask these groups to not do anything because that would be coordination. So we are both following the course of a positive campaign, and I'm very grateful for that. As for the negative attacks against me, the ones I've seen assert that I will vote with my Republican colleagues. And I wish my husband were here because he will tell you I'm a very independent-minded person and I will not be following any party line just for the sake of following party line. I am very much a common sense, pragmatic, just really look at the facts before me and make those decisions. So in responding to those attacks that have come out, the bottom line is I will not be following party line just for the sake of it. If I vote a certain way, it will be because I believe in it and I believe it's what is best in our community and it's what our community wants, because we're there to represent us, not a party.
Thank you. Additional comments? Next question goes to you first, Stacy. As our district becomes even more culturally and racially diverse, how will you ensure that the voices of all residents will be included in your decision making?
Well, I appreciate that question, and before I lived here, I lived in DC and I lived overseas before that. So I've had a very diverse background in meeting lots of people from many different cultures, and having traveled overseas a number of times, I just embrace the different cultures, and I love that our society welcomes them. I love that our community here welcomes them. And I think it's important for them to have representation at the Capitol. I know, especially with our Hmong community, it's, you know, they're just such an important part of who we are as Minnesotans. It's part of who we are, having these different communities that have really expanded here in our neighborhoods. And I know that it's important that their voice is heard. So I think in order for their representation, I would want to make sure that they're represented by any opportunities of meeting with them or any of their issues being brought forward at the state capitol.
Thank you. Peter Fischer?
Thank you very much. I started working on this issue back in 1979 when I joined the Maplewood Human Relations Commission. One of the things that we engage in very much is outreach into different communities, building relationships, something that I've continued on over the years. One of the things I've worked very hard on is I meet with on a regular basis from people in different communities, whether it be a Hmong community, African American community, etc. Trying to find out what the issues are, making sure that they're being engaged in the process. I think one of the things that I've also had the opportunity to is to have a better feel of what's going on in culture is the job that I have at working at a homeless youth shelter in North Minneapolis. I'm the minority in the area, and so it is something that I get to see and experience on a regular basis is what people are experiencing, what they're looking at, what their issues are, and their issues that they have look much differently than they do for us. First of all, in the racial justice issue, it's not unusual that in the minority community that in certain crimes that they're jailed at 3 to 4 times the rate as Caucasians are. It's not unusual where I run into people who we are hiring who've been arrested for spitting on the sidewalk. These people are of color. I've also run into instances where people of color who've gone in to vote and have photos IDs as they're registering have been not denied the opportunity to vote just because they don't look, the people registering don't feel they look like their photo. These are the issues that I've seen on a daily basis. These are the issues that the youth I work with on a daily basis face on a daily basis. And it's something that we have to start thinking, how do we better address it? How do we better engage them? And how, more importantly, do we give them the opportunity to be able to be successful in the future?
Thank you. Any additional comments, Stacey? No. Move on to the next question. We'll begin with you, Peter. Please identify 3 opportunities to increase accountability and transparency in government.
Wow, big one. 3. You know, there's a wide variety of things that can be done. And it depends on all local level of governments. I think some of the first things is making sure as much as possible government is using the data, internet as much as possible to have not only documents available online, but also making sure that we've got streaming and videotaping that's going on. One of the things I know that comes up from time to time is in terms of transparency, is trying to make sure that when we're at the Capitol Committee hearings, they're always being publicized, but also raises a question where we have time limits where we're supposed to go at night, and sometimes we waive those time limits so that we can continue to get our work done. And the thing that I've always struggled with is, as we waive the time limits and go past midnight, is that doing a disservice to people who were planning that we were only going to be around to midnight and interferes with that pattern. So we're doing work sometimes in the middle of the night. Sometimes we have to do that to be able to get our work done in time, but the thing I wrestle with is what happens to transparency and being able to allow things to go in. And some of the ways I try to address that is I usually have my cell phone with me or my laptop and keep an eye out for people who are up and seeing what kind of emails are coming in. A way to keep involved and informed as to what's going on is some of the ways that can be done.
Thank you. Stacy Stout?
I guess I'm thinking more specifically in some government areas that we could identify where there's a need for transparency and accountability. I think I mentioned earlier, the MNsure board. Certainly we should have more accountability for the people making those decisions on behalf of our, on behalf of all the insured on that plan. And the fact that they are not elected and there's no accountability, it's also difficult to have transparency there because we don't always get the answers we want. And there's no way to call them to account. I think another area is in our education system. As I've mentioned, I have boys in the school system. They're fortunate to have some of the best teachers. And I want that for every student. I think that's so important that we see that across the state. And so I think a way to do that is to have more accountability and ask, where are these dollars being spent? Are they getting to the classroom? Because we see in some areas that are getting more money per child than we are right here, there's not the same success rate. And so the dollars aren't translating into success for the student. And so I think there's a number of areas in government. I think we always need to be doing better. We can always have more accountability and transparency and making sure that we have prioritizing the needs of those in the communities to ensure that government is providing that.
Thank you. Any additional comments, Peter?
Right, and there's some times where these areas collide in data practices, and I think of a perfect one that's going to be an issue coming up is more and more police departments are looking at having cameras on them as they go through. And that raises questions about where does privacy of an individual take place and where doesn't it? And a perfect example would be if somebody has a medical issue, you've got a police officer there dealing with it, you've got HIPAA that's supposed to protect privacy, but then you've got the person recording it and somebody's going to want to see that recording. So we've got some interesting clashes that are going to come down the road is how do you have transparency but at the same time protect where are legitimate rights of the individual.
Stacy, any additional comments? All right. Our next question goes to you first, Stacy, and I believe it's from a young man in our audience. What do you plan to do about the education in the schools in the area?
Oh, okay. Well, there's a couple of in the area. It makes me think right here in Mahtomedi we have a levy that's on the ballot, and I am supporting the levy. As I've mentioned, I have young boys and they will be here through their high school years, and so I think that's a very important issue. I think the way our state runs or funds education, we have to have these levies, and I think it's important that we have local control of our schools, and our school board has determined what the needs are here, and so I'm trusting that they have identified that correctly. This is a participatory ballot issue, so I'm encouraging everyone to study this issue and come to their own decision, but I hope they'll make an informed one. And as far as education across the state, I think, and the rest of our area, because we have 3 school districts here, I think it's very important that we are prioritizing and making sure money is getting in the classroom. And I think we've made some really good steps, and I applaud the legislature for bringing all-day kindergarten. I supported it even previously when I had my older son in it. But I think we did take a wrong turn whenever we lowered graduation standards. And We eliminated the need to demonstrate proficiency in some of the in some of our basic skills. So I just think we constantly need to be making sure we're holding those making these decisions and what the needs are for our kids. We're holding them accountable, we're having transparency, and we're seeing the needs of our kids met so that they can succeed.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you very much. I also support the levy that is happening here in Mahtomedi. It's important that we provide funding to take care of the area schools and our area kids. And one of the great things I've been able to see is that here in Mahtomedi, they've done a great job. They have one of the lowest rates of funding per pupil at the metropolitan area. So I'm very confident that they're spending their money well, and they've got one of the best results, not just in the state, but in the country. So you get great bang for the buck here. I think some of the things that we have to keep in mind is that with the 4 school districts that we have here, besides Maplewood, Mahtomedi, White Bear Lake, we also have parts of Roseville School District in Maplewood. And one of the things that I've seen a lot as I've been talking to people is that we've got more and more people who are homeless who are in our schools. Last year there was a count of over 400 homeless youth at any one time. And one of the things, having dealt with the homeless youth population, is it's very hard for them to do studying, for them to be able to be successful without having a stable environment to be working out of. And what I'm really happy is when I take a look at what's happening in White Bear Lake, what I see happening in Roseville, and what I see happening in the 622 school district, is that they're working very hard to make sure that they're engaging people holistically across their approach. Take a look not what's happening just in school, but also talking amongst themselves, seeing how are the students doing, and what they're doing in their background, what kind of support they might need for the families. Backpack programs to send food home. It may not seem like a lot, but when you've got a family that's homeless or vicariously housed, this can make a big difference. This is some of the important things. If we're going to have successful kids in the future, these are some of the core things that if we don't address, they're going to fail.
Thank you. Any additional comments, Stacey?
Yes, I think Representative Fischer makes an important point that our kids who are facing homelessness or in severe poverty, education is the key for their way to opportunity and success. And that's why it's so important that we are making sure they're getting what they need in schools. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I don't know why we would ever lower the graduation standards. We should keep high standards here in all of our classrooms because it's key for those kids. That is their ticket out of poverty. It's their way to pursue opportunity and all kinds of new avenues. And so I think we need to keep the standards high, and I think that would be a much better direction and in the best interest of our kids.
Thank you. Peter, any additional comments?
Right. I hear a little bit about the graduation standards being lowered, and actually from what I was seeing that they're actually being modified to be more standardized across the area so that they're having tests that are a little bit more reflective. One of the things that they're looking at using is the test scores and standardizing test scores that they're actually used for college entrance exams. I think that's a reasonable way to approach it. But I think one of the things we have to recognize is that there are many more things that go into a child's well-being than just what the teacher is able to control in the classroom. And until we successfully address some of these issues, some of the kids will be condemned to repeat the cycle of not succeeding.
Thank you. Our next question goes to you first, Peter. Discuss how you would work collaboratively and in a bipartisan manner to get things done in St. Paul.
I think a lot of what I've done in the last session has been a very good representation of that. Working with the White Bear Lake water issues very shortly after being elected is working across party lines where I engaged with Representative Runback, Senator Chamberlain, who are both Republicans, Senator Uyghur, and Senator Scalzi to start calling people together in a collaborative way, building on the efforts that Representative McFarland had done, and bring community members together to see what is happening with the problems, keep them updated as to what's going on, and move solutions forward. In the last legislative session, one of the bills that we had going forward was to address how Department of Natural Resources was addressing the problems of the water management areas, because as they were being set up, it was an experiment, they were first setting it up, and they were doing it in a way that was not being very broad-based and making sure we had proper representation. So together with Linda Runback was the chief author, I was the co-author of having a bill come through to make sure to provide proper guidelines to the DNR as to how to better craft the water management area work groups so that they would have good representation, not only from state agencies, but more importantly, having broad participation from people in different cities. And this was sponsored, and we worked very closely with the League of Cities to make this happen. We also worked very closely to make sure that we were avoiding unintended consequences, making sure that we had businesses represented. Those are just some of the initial things that I've been very successful on, and I've been recognized by the League of Cities for being successful on that.
Thank you. Stacey?
Well, I think I pointed out in my background, I worked at the Department of Justice, and I worked under both the Bush administration and the Obama administration. And I worked on really important issues, and my bosses were politicals. And I've worked on regulatory matters too, with both sides of the aisle. And so it is part of who I am. I believe that we need to see people working in a bipartisan way in order for our community's needs to be met. And when we see people up there just voting along party lines, no, that doesn't really benefit us as a community. I applaud our Representative Fischer's efforts on the White Bear Lake effort, and he did work in a bipartisan way on that issue. However, on most other issues, it was very partisan voting, and as far as I can tell, he voted yes on 100% of the time on every bill for final passage, and I just don't see where a bipartisan message and a bipartisan approach is reflected in that. So as for me, I just know, as having my background, it's part of who I am. I believe that we need a bipartisan approach in the decisions being made at the Capitol, and that's what I'm committed to.
Thank you. Additional comments?
Yes. I know that in most of the votes that we had this past year, that over 90% of the time we have people from both sides working together and voting on those issues. I think that's one of the other things that I was also very good at, is not only working across party lines, but more importantly, working with different agencies and groups throughout the community. I worked very closely with the St. Paul Chamber and the White Bear Chamber, putting legislation through that brought a number of solutions and funding forward to help address the issues around White Bear Lake. So it's not just about being bipartisan, but facilitating the meeting with the community throughout the areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments, Stacy? Next question goes to you first. What measures do you think need to be implemented to improve election procedures?
I think it's important that we have an excellent voting system that ensures everyone has a right for their vote to be counted. And I think there are a number of ways now that we can vote. You can vote by absentee many days ahead of the election. And so I think we're trying to ensure that everyone has their opportunity to cast their ballot. And I think the main thing we need to ensure is that there's not any fraud or abuse of the system. And that requires ensuring that the person who's voting is the person that they say they are, and ensuring that we are holding people who break the law accountable.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you very much. I think some of the ways we can improve the election process is make it easier for people to vote. I'm glad we were able to move forward the fact that you were able to vote early. That's one of the things that in other states where they have much more liberal policies, they found that helps improve their participation rate a little bit. One of the things that I like to make sure is that we're making sure that people are having the opportunity not only to vote, but also making sure that we aren't putting barriers up in front of them to make it challenging. And barriers sometimes that become very subjective. Now, earlier tonight I mentioned about the instance where we had a youth at our facility that wanted to vote, had proper documentation, and was turned down because the person who looked at the documentation felt the person didn't look like her passport. Very frustrating, because at that point in time, that person who was eligible to vote and legally able to vote was denied because somebody made a subjective choice. And that's the problem that I have with some voter ID that's going out there. And particularly in this instance where you have a Caucasian making a determination on somebody who is an African American. And for our youth, it's very hard to get them engaged. They're used to being put down by society, not being empowered. Having somebody in power always taking away their advantages. And here we finally get the chance where we've got the youth engaged, getting them excited, having the chance to go out to vote for the first time, and having somebody say, well, yes, that might be a legal document, but my opinion doesn't mean it, so you don't vote. I found that very, very negative. And it took away the damage that it did to that person, and the ability to be able to trust that system going forward and be able to be successful in the future is damage beyond control that I find very offensive.
Thank you. Additional comments, Stacey? The next question goes to you first, Peter. Can you name a program that you think should be eliminated or cut back?
Boy, I've got some people who'd love to get rid of the DNR. You know, in this past legislative session, we had a lot of unsessioned laws that we had that came through, that we worked on. that did away with a lot of government regulation that occurred. And part of the problem is we did not have enough time to deal with them all because we had such a short session. I think it is something that we have to continue to evaluate on a regular basis, because some of the agencies that are put together today may not be as important in the future. Likewise, there have been times where we've eliminated areas of government that we find out today that was a regret to do. The perfect example was the Legislative Water Commission that I worked hard to reinstate. So the Legislative Water Commission used to work very hard on water policy. Water policy is very complicated because of the science involved. And you need a core group of legislators to be able to get together, understand the science, and work on it off session because it is so intense and works so differently in so many different areas of the state. As a cost-saving move years ago, we did away with it. Now we're kicking ourselves because these are the kind of things that it's going to take us a year or two to get it started and up to speed, because we have 16 areas of our state where we're having serious water issues. And so what we need to be taking a look at is, where is government being effective and where isn't it? And where government is not being effective, we need to be changing it and making it effective and working in that kind of regard. So it's not so much about doing away with it, but making sure it's being effective and working for all of us.
Thank you. Stacy?
Well, I think mentioning the DNR makes me think of Bowser and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and there's a number of agencies that seem to overlap many times. And so I guess we could see a need for streamlining what they do and really eliminating areas where they overlap. I think it's really a problem whenever you've got agencies trying to create more work for themselves to keep themselves as the agency in control of a certain issue. And so it's a problem when we don't see agencies looking to cut. That's what we should be seeing. Agencies should be trying to streamline and cut waste in every area they can. There should be prioritization, and that way then there's accountability and transparency, and we're squeezing every dollar out that we can from our tax dollars in the best use and efficiency, so that we as taxpayers are getting what we should from our government agencies. These agencies have important roles, but the problem is too many times they've lost sight of what they should be doing, trying to keep their hands in a lot of different areas, and then they're crossing lines. So we should make sure that they're not crossing those lines and ensuring that it's all being streamlined so that there's no overlap.
Thank you. Any additional comments, Peter?
And one of the things we have to be very careful and keep in mind as we're making effective government is that we're not cutting to the bone as has happened in the past. Having worked in the nonprofit world, I've seen many times where services that our youth need to be successful take 6, 12 months before they're able to get those, and as a result, it limits their opportunity to be able to move out of shelter into safe, stable housing going forward. And that is because we put such a factor on reduce government, and not looking at what the real impacts are as we go forward.
Thank you. Any additional comments? No. Next question goes to you first, Stacy. The district enjoys the benefits of the Gateway State Trail, but overall there are thousands of miles of state trails that the legislature authorized 30 to 50 years ago but never funded to build. How would you propose completing the state trail system and sustainably funding ongoing maintenance?
Well, living close to the Gateway Trail, I appreciate it's the benefit of that. And I understand that we have great plans for, and when we authorized the trails. The reason they haven't been funded is because we have a number of other things that need to be funded in our state. And so it always comes back to prioritization. And so while I think we want to continue to see the use of these trails and encourage the use of these trails so that we can all enjoy our beautiful state, we have to make sure that it's reasonable, and when we're funding these, it's got to be in mind of everything else that we're trying to fund as well. So I hope that we'll continue to see these beautiful trails enjoyed, and the communities will benefit from them. But at the same time, as far as when we can continue to fund them and when we'll continue them and connect them all, I think that's a matter of what priorities we have at the moment.
Thank you. Peter Fischer?
Thank you. One of the things that I think we kind of missed the opportunity on is with the legacy funds. There's a component of the legacy funds that helps address the parks and trails and those areas. One of the problems that has happened over time as we've been working with the legacy funds is when government got very tight and started using some of those funds instead of addressing the things that we'd like to be able to complete in the trail system, it started supplementing basic core services that used to be done by the government. And as a result, it's kind of shorted ourselves as we've gone down the road. I'm open for finding new ways to make sure that we're providing funding for not only making sure we complete the system, but to provide ongoing maintenance. These are not easy answers. They're not something that I've had a lot of chance to be able to do some research on. It's one of the things I'm looking forward to continue to working with the groups that are working in these areas to find some great solutions that we can bring forward that will make sure that they're sustainable for the future.
Thank you. Any additional comments? The next question goes to you first, Peter. How would you describe yourself politically?
I'm a Democrat. I'm a progressive Democrat, but I'm also one that has a personality style over the years that has always been willing to sit down and realize I don't have all the answers, and that the only way I can make sure that we get the best answers for it is sit down and have very serious discussions to find out what is the best way to move the state forward. In the city of Maplewood, we had a project called the Gladstone Task Force to figure out how we were going to redevelop the area, where a number of us got together and very passionately had great discussions about what's the best way to redevelop the area, and what are the things we should consider. And we batted a lot of ideas around back and forth, and some of the solutions that we came out in the final report were things that I had not thought of it the first time around. But because we were coming together, this local city facilitated the opportunity for us to come together from businesses, from the local community, from residents, from the different commissions. We were able to come up with a great project to recommend. I think that's one of the things that I bring as a strength. It's something that I did very strongly in the Parks Commission on Maplewood for over 20 years. It's helping facilitate those kind of discussions. I think that's one of the most important things that is one of my strengths, is not just being a Democrat or progressive, but being able to recognize we don't have all the answers, and it's when we work together that we come up with the best answers.
Thank you. Stacy Stout, how do you describe yourself politically?
Well, I don't always find it easy to describe myself, but I am fiscally conservative, most certainly, and I think that mostly comes from being a working mom and understanding that balancing so many things, it's important that you look at priorities and make sure you're getting the most out of every dollar that you have in your family budget. And I see that that is true with our state budget and federal budget is where my views on that are shaped. I think also as a mom, I feel like we need to make sure we're ensuring a positive future for our kids. And so I sometimes describe myself as conservative but look at things with a very practical, pragmatic, and common sense approach. So while I bring my values to the table, I look at all the facts before me and then make the best decision with all the facts at hand.
Thank you. The next question goes to you first. How or should the state reduce the amount of debt that students graduate from college with?
Well, that's a very important issue, especially with many of our college students graduating and still trying to find jobs. I think we need to find a way to keep the growth of tuition under control. And I know the state took the legislature took some steps this year to try to help with students' debt. I think we need to really think outside the box and determine what's driving the cost of tuition. And we need to be addressing that, because it's important for our kids to be educated, not just for their job, but so that they're informed citizens and they've been able to pursue a number of educational areas so that they're well-informed citizens. We want them to be educated, but we don't want it to burden them. So we really need to find a way for our students to pursue their college education and determine how to keep those costs down.
Thank you. Peter Fischer?
Thank you very much. I think there's several things that can be done. Some have already in process to help keep it down, and that is the higher education committees from both the House and the Senate have been very tough going after the university system and the college system to make sure that they're keeping people in line with what they're paying in compensation packages and making sure that they're not overloaded in their administrative side. But I think one of the biggest telling things is when I went to college at Lakewood here, which is now Century, back in the late 70s, at that time, the state covered most of the funding. I paid only 1/3 of the cost, and the state paid 2/3. What has happened, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, is that as things have gotten tight, the state cut back as to what they were providing as their fair share and decided that they could not sustain that anymore, and they flipped the ratio around so that today the students are actually paying 2/3 and the state is only paying 1/3 of the cost. It was a conscious decision that the state made. To be able to reduce that and try to start addressing that, several things have been done. We increased the number of grants that were available for students going forward to help address that. But more importantly is the state this past time around, by making sustainable changes in our budget, is we had a little bit more money that we could put into higher education to freeze tuition for 2 years. It does not go a long way in undoing what has happened over the last 15 years. We're not going to solve the problem over 15 years. But taking little steps down the road and making a commitment that is worth making the investment, and that's coming down to, do we have the ability to make the political investment and the capital investment to start reducing that and changing the ratios of how much the state is paying versus the student.
Thank you. Any additional comments, Stacy? I'm afraid that was our last question, and I have to compliment the audience on some excellent questions tonight. We will now move to closing statements, and we will go in the reverse order of our opening statements, and we will begin with Stacy Stout.
Well, thank you again to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event, and thank you to all of you here tonight for being here. We've heard many important issues, and I appreciate the questions that were asked. I really believe that we have better outcomes if all viewpoints are presented and heard whenever we're looking at issues. As an attorney, I've served 2 presidents, one from each political party, demonstrating my ability to problem solve and to work across party lines. As a mom, I'm committed to ensuring that we have high standards in education for all our students. And having parents who are seniors, who live on a fixed income, rely on Social Security and Medicare, I'm committed to making sure the needs of our elderly are met. Having worked at the U.S. Department of Justice and having a husband who works for a sheriff, I am committed to keeping our communities safe and ensuring law enforcement have the tools that they need. We want efficient and effective government. We want prioritized spending towards our schools, improving our roads, caring for our vulnerable, keeping our communities safe. We need policies that promote a high quality of life for everyone. We want a representative who will examine each issue critically and exhibit the courage to vote for our community and not vote along party lines just for the sake of voting party line. I have the ability to problem solve, to respect different opinions and work across party lines, to use effective collaborative strategies. Those are strengths I will take to the legislature. I will be a principled, pragmatic, independent voice for us, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Now with his closing statement, Peter Fischer.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting on the forum tonight. Thank you for coming tonight. For those in attendance, thank you for those of you who are watching on TV. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be part of this process. I want to say that over the last 2 years, it's been an honor to represent you. And I want to say that I've worked very hard to advance different issues, not only on behalf of the local people here, but also on local businesses. One of the things that I was chief author of a bill for our local Chamber of Commerce that helped repeal the sales tax exemption that repealed the capital sales tax penalty that they had to pay. They used to pay for their sales tax on capital equipment as they were going forward. We've changed that so that they are exempted from it. They are able to get that sales tax exemption up front. That is something very important to the business community. I'm proud to have been the chief author to help move that through in the House. That's one of the ways I can show that I work with people across the area. I'm working with the St. Paul Chamber now to address the important transit areas that we have, the transportation areas. They have an East Metro Strong project going. I'm working very closely with them and have had several meetings out in the local community with people at Century College, bringing people who represent the homeless population to figure out how we can better address those kind of issues. Something that I've had proven experience over the last 20 years, first in parks, now at the state capitol. It's something I'd like to continue. I think that some of the other things that are real important is that I know that I've got a broad basis of people that I'm used to working with. I'm supported by teachers, I'm supported by and I'm supported by labor. I'm also supported by environmental groups, Sierra Club. I'm supported by Clean Water Action, Conservation Minnesota, because I've heard very clearly environment is very important in our area. And more importantly, for recognizing how concerned I am about keeping people safe. I received the endorsement of the Minnesota firefighters and also the endorsement of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers associations. Those are the kind of things I want to do, is to make sure that we continue working together in a collaborative way and helping facilitate the answers for our future. Thank you for your time. I hope I can count on your vote in November.
Thank you. The League thanks the candidates for their participation, GTN Channel 16 for broadcasting this event. the City of Mahtomedi for the use of their facilities, our league volunteers, and you, the audience, for your interest and attention. Let your voice be heard on November 4th and vote. Thank you and good night.